They will be on the ground to render assistance to the people who are badly in need of assistance, that they should also be balanced in their outreach, that Region 5 is made up of many people, PPP supporters, APNU supporters, etc., and that they should go to all the areas to ensure that people receive support at this very difficult time. It does not leave me, from what I've seen so far, in a hopeful mood, that they are serious about going underground. They have been written to by the regional chairman several times, several agencies of the government. He's contacted the CDC, he's contacted the central government, he's contacted the MMA. They wrote several letters. Most of these letters are not acknowledged. The regional chairman with a team went into Moraikabai. They went to visit the coastal areas long before we seen yesterday a few ministers going out there and the rivers. And in spite of the difficulties that he faces now, faced with the thuggery of APNU supporters at the Regional Democratic Council, the behavior that this government should condemn. President Granger, who talks a lot about social cohesion and allowing local government organs to work, should look at what his government is doing in relation to the Region 5, where they have disrupted every single meeting this year because somehow the regional chairman did not go to a meeting that the president had in the region. When I was president, I went to many regions in this country, and the regional chair did not show up in some of the meetings. I went to Region 10 that was controlled by APNU, and many, many times the regional chairman would just ignore our outreach to the region. But we were not so thin-skinned and believe we're so special, like the president seems to believe, that everybody has to go to his meeting. And if they don't go to the meeting, the regional chairman or elected officials, and these are elected officials, not appointed officials, elected by the people of the region, then the whole region and its work must be disrupted. They can't carry out their programs, and because the region can't carry out its programs, its budget remains largely unspent. And the money that is being spent being spent by the REO without the appropriate oversight. But this may be what they're hoping to do. And the same behavior replicates itself on the East Coast. That leads me to believe that it's a pattern. They have someone from the RDC, I think the deputy chairman of the RDC, who insists on going to all of these meetings, particularly the local government bodies where the PPP has won, to give instructions to councillors there. He could go, he could speak, he could present an advice, but the councillors are in charge. They've been elected. This government is saying how it's so proud that it has returned local democracy to many of these areas. And this is the behavior. So if the region was functioning, then we would have had probably a greater outreach, and maybe the entire RDC, APNU and PPP councillors could have worked together in extending more benefits to people and avoiding some of the problems that people are experiencing in Region 5 now. But it just shows how out of touch this government is when it declared that it had ended flooding in Guyana just a month ago in their center spread achievement. And so if they ended flooding in Guyana, how can they admit that we have flooding in Region 5? I hope that the government will look at what's going on in those areas. People badly need help. and they should extend the help. There have been several things that have been discussed publicly since my last press conference. And so I want to address some of them. But there seems to be a pattern emerging around a few areas. And so I will want to focus a bit on, or broadly group some of these things that happen and focus on them as a block of ideas. First of all, we have seen after the government had made these major pronouncements that the Guyana will experience a boom after the celebration of the Jubilee. They said 61,000 people will come to Guyana, and it will be a big boost for the economy, and we will see a turnaround. And nothing happened. It's a damn squid, as we had pointed out, that an event, celebration of an event, cannot substitute the necessity of having a plan, an economic plan, a development plan for the country. That the government needs to outline what its policies are in various sectors. The productive sectors, first of all, and maybe the social sectors, but mainly in the productive sectors to ensure that the country keeps growing, creating wealth for individuals, revenue for the state, employment for young people. The government has failed to do this. It has made and continues to make a series of excuses at every single level. And all we have are these cliched pronouncements, these declarative statements that ministers make from time to time, and even the president himself, as though these themselves constitute a plan. Clearly something is wrong. That after a year in office, that they would still believe that these declarative statements could suffice in this country to take us forward. And so and especially after they promised in their manifesto that within the first 100 days that they already had a plan, and within the first 100 days that this plan would be revealed in greater details to Guyanese. The insult, we were now insulted by Mr. Harman when he said the plans will have to come out of strategies and they can't have it ready anytime soon. But they do not even have or have not outlined the strategies themselves. He spoke of a green economy. So we've been hearing a lot about the green economy. They named a budget after it. The president made several speeches. They have signed on to the Paris Agreement, but nothing in any major way about the content of what a green economy would mean. How will a green economy, through various initiatives and policies, create growth in Guyana, create income for people, wealth, that's gross domestic product, and how will it create jobs? So if you listen to President Obama, he'd say, my stimulus package for green economy, and he would name a specific industry, like solar panels, will generate 500,000 jobs over 5 years through these measures. We have not heard anything of the details surrounding this green economy. They have a major dilemma. Having taken an anti-national, anti-patriotic position in the past, when they criticized the low-carbon development strategy, which has been globally acclaimed. It's been used many parts of the world. Senior leaders in many countries refer to our low-carbon development strategy as one of cutting-edge strategy. But they criticized it. You would recall that in 2001, a list of people, including Ramjatan and Janet Bulkan, who now helps to formulate government's policies, Christopher Ram and others, wrote Erik Solheim, who was then minister in Norway, a minister responsible for the environment, outlining 8 points. 8 points. And they were urging, basically, they urged Norway not to give Guyana any money. Not to give them same money that they are now beneficiaries of and they're spending now. They urged Norway not to give Guyana any money, and they pointed out eight things. If you read that letter, you can go online, go to Red Monitor, and you would see the letter. You would see they spoke about lack of transparency in regard to the projects. Now, we have about 16 LCDS projects that we've started funding when we left office, to transformative projects that will create wealth for people and jobs for them in the hinterland and along the coast, including loans, etc. Ask them how transparent they have been in outlining the implementation of these projects. In fact, they took down the website. That website we had put up through the LCDS Secretariat carried every comment, the comments that were critical of us as well as favorable, because we wanted to make it, to give it a balanced view. It outlined a status report on implementation of LCDS projects. We put the minutes of the steering committee meeting on their website. They've taken that website down. So they're using the money without being transparent about it. Secondly, they talk about consultations. I recall us having over 300 meetings across Guyana, about 10 in Georgetown, at the convention center, bringing people together to discuss the LCDS and our policies. They have done nothing of the sort, no consultations. Thirdly, the steering committee that the president chaired and that had stakeholders from different entities. The steering committee has not been meeting almost a year, so you can't have minutes. So people, the stakeholders, can't get their views in. I can list every single thing that they had in that letter that they complained about the PPP, and now it's 10 times worse, and nobody says a word. But they can't embrace the low-carbon development strategy, although it is comprehensive in its outlook. It is not an environmental strategy. It is a growth strategy, but a growth strategy that uses a trajectory that is non-polluting, because you need a growth strategy for a country like Guyana, not a conservation strategy. So, having criticized the low-carbon development strategy, they can't now embrace it, publicly at least, but they're using the money that we raised from it. So they went back to Iwakrama. Now, Iwakrama was given by Mr. Hoyt because they think that's APNU. In 1989, was pledged to the Commonwealth to study sustainable forestry practices, which could then be replicated across the Commonwealth. They forgot that that was just a pledge, that in 1996, it was the PPP government that passed the act that brought Iwakrama into being, passed the law, went to Parliament and passed that law. We didn't throw away the pledge because it came from Mr. Hoyt. we move forward to implement it. We develop a law, we pass the law, and that is how Iroquois came into being. And we have, from a budgetary perspective, even when Iroquois could not raise finances to keep its operations going, we kept pumping money into Iroquois from a limited treasury, just to keep it going. We didn't deny it because it started with Mr. Hoyt. So they've gone back to Iroquois. But Iroquois is not a growth strategy. Iroquois is not a growth strategy. So there is a whole deal of confusion because they have the president making these statements and an inept minister who I think now, Mr. Trotman, who has farmed out the intellectual work to foreigners. So now our whole approach to environment is driven by people with special interests and groups from abroad who write him papers so that he could read these papers at various conferences, etc. There is no indigenous thinking, national thinking going through these the approaches. So we signed on, I told you about, we signed on to the Paris Agreement. And in the Paris Agreement, there are several commitments that this country made that will come back to haunt us because they're not driven by national concerns. First of all, the concern about, they said they will move Guyana to 100% renewable energy by 2025. So in 9 years' time, we're supposed to believe that this country will use 100% renewable energy. Now, assuming it's impossible to say that every car now, every truck, every vehicle that you have on the road, every power plant in Guyana that you have will be shut down and we will start using renewable energy, ethanol for our cars, the hydropower and solar energy by 2025. It's the silliest thing I've seen because even the developed countries are not promising 100% renewable energy. It's impossible to have. And even if you leave out the transport sector and say, focus only on electricity generation, 100% energy for electricity generation. We still cannot achieve that. The Amila Falls would have probably decarbonized about 90% of our energy needs. But Amila is not on the table. What are you going to do that with? There's not a single initiative of this government that we know of at this point in time to meet 1% of the target, much less 100%. Not a single initiative that we know, that the public knows of now. Not a single plan. And they promise that in 9 years' time, it will happen. And to build a hydro alone, to put together the finances and the construction, will take 8 years' time. We'll go past that. So it is not credible. It is absolutely not credible. The next thing they promised is to add another 2 million hectares for conservation of our forests. Now you know that we had one of the lowest deforestation rates in the world. In 2014, and in international, as part of the Norwegian agreement, a group came in to verify. They come in every year to verify our deforestation rate. It was 0.065%. That was it, the percentage, deforestation, one of the lowest in the world. This flies in the face of all the lies that Trotman told in Parliament, that we had given out all the forest lands. It's not true. You have a lot of forest lands that are unallocated. More than half of our forests are unallocated to companies. And in fact, of the allocated part, most of those were given out pre-1992. So that's a lie. And when they talk about Asian companies, Baishanlin and all the others that are raping the forest, that is what Janet Bulkan and the others used to say. How could it be that they were raping? The PPP was allowing that to happen. And when we had the measured, internationally measured deforestation rate, it's one of the lowest in the world. So it was a lie. But compounding that, although we have such a low forest deforestation rate, what the government has done now is they decided to pledge 2 million hectares more of our forests for conservation purposes. And so what this means, they have not told us how they are going to get that done, but it could very well mean that one, they will take back land from forests, the people who are, have forest leases, two, from miners, and even if they don't, would be 2 million hectares more of our land that we can bring into productive use. They have this old idea of conservation, where that you must keep, that you mustn't touch the trees. You mustn't touch them. Although trees die all the time naturally, and you can extract trees because that's a modern view. Our view of conservation was that you should continue to use these resources in a manner that brings benefits to people, but in a environmentally low impact way. It was a balanced view, development and conservation. So they've gone, driven by many international groups here and by some of the local people who have a clueless about these issues. Trotman has now taken our country into a new area. It is a pure conservation that will harm growth and development and would run counter to the green economy that President Granger speaks about. It is not a green economic plan. It is a conservation plan that he is putting forward, the pledge that they made to the world through the INDC. And you know what is so problematic is that the developed countries are not even making those kinds of pledges. The developed countries of the world. We in Guyana, we are a net carbon sink. It means our emission levels are lower than all of the sequestration of greenhouse gases we do. We're net carbon sink. But in that pledge, in the same pledge that Trotman made when he sold out Guyana through bad negotiations and bad pledges, he sold out our national interests, and it runs counter to the development. It says the conservation, I'm reading from the pledge that the government made. The conservation of an additional 2 million hectares through the Guyana's National Protected Area System and other effective area-based conservation measures as per Guyana's commitment, including the protection of conservancies and reservoirs and their watersheds and the watersheds upstream of new hydropower sites. So they've also pledged in this protection of watersheds upstream of new hydropower sites. So if we do want to develop hydropower in the future, with this pledge here that they made, we're going to have a hugely difficult time. Maybe it might become an impossibility. I'm saying that bad negotiations, that Trotman and the others, he is leading our international efforts poorly. They are led by the nose, as they have been led by the nose in many other areas. We saw one foreign diplomat almost directing the government what to do. They're being led by the nose, and it is contrary to the development of a green plan. So even if Harman is right when he says that by the time the next election they would have the plan, 3, 4 years' time, what they're doing now will harm the national interest. This is a major thing for Guyana. It's major because they're harming not just our global reputation, but also our interests. Truckman thinks that if he criticizes the PPP overseas and other places, that it would fly in relation to the donors, that they would love him. They would not. It would harm the country's interests, and that he's still stuck in that mode. So I'm sad that this government has not put forward an economic plan, no economic strategy, coherent economic strategy. Their promise of a green plan and a green economy is all built on shaky foundations and just pronouncements, no special initiatives or policies. A government that is daydreaming, sleepwalking, sitting around and just spouting rhetoric with they're playing with people's lives and their jobs and their income and the future of our country. And the president needs to hold press conferences that are real press conferences, rather than just sit down invite a few people to go and sit down and do these talks that he has. One press conference for 30 minutes in a single year. When I was president, if I didn't have a press conference in 2 weeks' time, they said I was hiding from the press. They used to say I was hiding from the press. In 2 weeks, he has done 30 minutes one in a year, so that the media could question him on these matters, and he can't get away with just talking and then running off. They just talk, say a few things that sound good, and then run off again because they can't be probed. The next thing is about corruption. The president said he wants to stamp out corruption in one of these special interviews. And I agree, this is a lofty goal of the president, and he wants to be transparent. In fact, the president says that commercial contracts should not be secret contracts, and that agreements made under the PPP are not state secret. And I agree with him. And then he says, that's not the way I do business. No, that's the way I do business, above board and transparently. So clearly, he's living in a bubble, because all that is happening in his government runs contrary to what he's saying. Let me give you, so if President Granger is serious about what he said about stamping out corruption and doing things transparently, how come until now we're asking him to look into the DDL matter and make a purple pronouncement on the matter? In the DDL matter, tax waivers were given, and the liabilities to the Treasury because of the opening of a door for other claims based on comparable treatment will cost the Treasury $60 billion at a minimum. $60 billion, not $1 million. We have been asking, who made this agreement? Is it the staff of GRA? Is it the board? Is it the cabinet? And does he not have, since they want to disclose all the agreements that they have under the PPP, which they can do now because they have the agreements, it's easy for them to disclose the agreements, made the Marriott agreement, the Baishan one, why not just make them public? But is it not time for him to disclose this agreement too, that will cost us $60 billion? Nothing that the PPP did has come even remotely close to giving up $60 billion of revenue. Remotely close. And he says, I do things transparently. I do things, we must stamp out corruption. I want to release all the commercial contracts. And they're sitting on one of the biggest secrets ever. Secondly, the fuel smuggling racket that's going on. I think they removed the chairman or the CEO of GAIL to facilitate the widespread theft that is taking place. There's seriously about 3 or 4 different schemes going on in fuel smuggling now. We have seen Mr. Jackman, an African national who filed an affidavit now, saying that people brought him here to smuggle, paid him to bring his vessels here to smuggle Mr. Jackson. To smuggle fuel. That is in his affidavit. He's called the names of the people. Now, it is simple. It is simple to get to. Then we know what else is going on in GAIL. Let me give you 2 instances of what has become public knowledge, because many of the senior people, not the staff, many of the political people that they put in GAIL and some ministerial level people have been involved in this racket. If GAIL needs 400,000 tons of, I'm just using an example, of fuel for the month, they will, and the vessel can bring 200,000 tons per trip. The GAIL now, they pay now for the vessel to make 4 trips. So GAIL pays for 4 trips. And the siphon off, GAIL only collects 100,000. Although 200,000 comes on the vessel, GAIL will collect 100,000 and another party collects 100,000. So they get it free of free. The vessels they're siphoning off the fuel. Everybody knows this. This is a large-scale theft that would run into billions of dollars. It's been happening over the last 8 months or so. 8 months. We've been talking about it. It's easy for him to find out, launch not a ministerial inquiry, but get the SOCU and others, an external group, because some of the people, ministers are involved too. Get an external group to look at it. But he will come and talk about, he's fighting corruption here. And everybody knows this. This is an open secret that some of them are benefiting, and some of the people who made large campaign donations now, they're involved in this racket now to smuggle fuel. This is their payback. So, number 2, Mr. President, if you're serious about what you said and what you've been saying, here are 2 things that we can talk about. Number 3, the specialty hospital. They talk about the PPP. It was a corrupt project under the PPP. We thought that after the government took office, they will investigate this corrupt project and prosecute whoever they had to prosecute, the corrupt people, because this was supposed to be a corrupt project, the specialty hospital. To our surprise, they then said they were going to use the PPP's evaluation, that is the technical evaluation that was done under the PPP, to award the contract to the second-ranked bidder. We then pointed out, no. the technical evaluation under the PPP had the second bidder, the person, Feathers Lloyd, disqualified. There was no second, it wasn't a second rank bidder. Nevertheless, they persisted. And we know of the special relationship between Ramjatan and some others with this company. They persisted in giving a single sourcing, got Feathers Lloyd to do its own bills of quantity to assess how much work had to be done there and to award a contract which would have been 14 to 18 million US over $3.6 billion single sourcing. The transparency group here in Guyana complained about it. We complained about it. President Granger turned a blind eye to it, a blind eye, and he talks about stamping out corruption. Turned a blind eye to it, and it was only stopped when the World Bank disqualified that company for, I suspect, bribery of government officials. That's why they are disqualified. So how could he? He should now launch an investigation about the single sourcing. So that is number 3 he could look into. Number 4, we saw the Minister of Finance say to the Parliament that the cost of generating power is 28 cents per kilowatt hour. We pointed out immediately it's not true. It's more at the current price of fuel, it's about 11 cents per kilowatt hour. So one had to question, why was this necessary to say 28 cents per kilowatt hour? But he said it in his budget speech. He said we are negotiating a deal to buy power from wind power at about half that price, which is about 14 cents per kilowatt hour. Couldn't justify buying renewable energy at a price that is lower than the cost of generation through fossil fuel and significantly lower than the cost of hydropower from a miler, which they had killed. It was done. And guess who they were negotiating with and might be negotiating now with? So the president says, allow transparency. Tell us what the negotiations, about these negotiations that are going on with Lloyd Singh, who is the person who built the AFC office, the same person who the lilac milk, the IPA person. So a contract is being negotiated in secrecy that will harm us in the future. Why not tell us where this contract is? We have had this lilac milk story from the same person, lilac milk. Milk, as many have written, is unfit for babies, being sold across the board. And the government is taking such a callous approach. They will not remove this stuff from the shells. And Ramjatan keeps saying, oh, I've given orders, but they still remain on the shelf. So he could look into that too. That's number 4. He could look into the single sourcing of drug purchases to a bottom house operation close to for $150 million. How that happened? Because they said that they're going to improve the purchase of drugs. And by the way, I've seen a lot about single sourcing, but most single sourcing was an exception, not the rule under the PPP, even in the procurement of drugs. And so when we purchased from New GPC was pre-qualified through a competitive process. Pre-qualifying a company is not the same as single sourcing. They have to go through a competitive process. And so we asked the government when the motion was debated in Parliament, we asked them, when are you starting to pre-qualify? And you know what they're saying? They're saying somebody coming in to help them pre-qualify, to develop the criteria for pre-qualification. So that will take place next year. In the meantime, they can buy from suitcases and bottom house operations. and our drug supplies. And you saw ministers denying that drugs were short. And just talk to any doctor at the Georgetown Hospital, and they will tell you, just any doctor, about the long list that they receive every week to say these are not available. Just talk to them. So even that, the president could look into that. He could look into how they spent $420 million to give another campaign financer a fertilizer deal, single source. He talks about corruption. He says transparency, reveal the contract. If you're saying you should make all contracts public, you're the president. All you have to do is to call and say, I want all of the contracts available and released to the public now. The president can do that in 30 seconds. They could release the Baishan one. They can release the Marriott one. They can release every contract in 30 seconds. But it's not good enough to come there. The Durban Park, I'm giving you a list of all the things. Durban Park, the lack of transparency surrounding that project. Who the donors were, we can't know until now. Who gave money for the project and how much money did they give? And did they get special contract awards? How much did the government spend? We heard it's $150 million that this government spent. But I've heard recently, about 2 weeks ago, bills totaling $800 million have now been submitted for people who never even tendered because they were told to just go on the site. And now they're submitting their bills and a total $800 million. We want transparency in that area too. That's single sourcing. $800 million of bills. The parking meter. It's the city council. You can't take credit for the cleanup that the city council did, because it's the city council that cleaned up the city, basically. They did it, and they funded it largely from collection of arrears through this amnesty that they gave. The city council had been there for 50 years. Under the PNC, they could have done it under us. They didn't do it, but that's water under the bridge. The government takes credit for the work of the city council. If you take credit, you have to take the blame for the corruption there too. And so we want the president to ask how the contracts, the cleanup was done, who got the contracts. And we want him to ask about this parking meter thing, this peripheral kind of thing, as though they don't know, they all know about it. The government, many people in the government know about the parking meter scandal that they have. And I don't know what this city council is intent on doing. First, it was the vendors to throw people off from earning a living in the name of cleaning up the city. Now it's bringing hardships to people to park, everyone. They will collect $4 billion there. I think $800 million may come to the city council, but the investors could collect $4 billion a year. That's $4 billion out of the pockets of residents of this country. That's people. They should scrap this program. It's pure nonsense. We can't bring hardships on more poor people. Workers, if you're earning $60,000 a month and you got to pay parking, you know, for your vehicle out there, you'd probably end up paying maybe $16,000 a month, even more, much more, right? 80,000. Well, what, the $500? Well, they said they would reduce it. Even if they reduce by half, that's $40,000. Imagine that. So you now have to park your car by Pradoville 2 and walk over here and walk all the way into the city. So that is the approach. I can go down. I wanted to give a long list of things that he can look into. Don't just go on a prepackaged TV program and say how I support. I don't support the death penalty, yet my government passed a law with the death penalty in it. You're the president. If you don't support the death penalty, you say, I don't support this, I don't want it. Whilst we're waiting, don't put this in the law. The president has to stop hiding now. A year has passed. Can't be a ceremonial president anymore. And can't say I'm aloof from all of these things, because it's unbelievable what is happening. And then maybe I should end here. Just those two things I wanted to deal with: economy and this whole thing about stamping out corruption. So thank you very much. I'm available for questions.
Thank you. With the questions, please.
Shanika, first of all, start with news. You spoke of your visit to Region 5 and noticing that there is need for the government to intervene and bring relief to the individual.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of a scope as, during your tenure as president, what infrastructure was put in that community to alleviate flood? What infrastructure?
Well, I'm very glad that you asked me this. It gives me a chance to speak about some of the things. First of all, the Hope Canal that I was maligned for. First, it was a corrupt project, but they can investigate it now. Secondly, it was supposed to be technically unsound. Some engineers came and advised afternoon. They said it's technically unsound. It wouldn't work. And that thirdly, it would be a white elephant. This was up to May, when elections were held. May 2015, just before the elections. I saw Greenwich saying this on TV in New Amsterdam, wasting money on this project. Immediately after the elections, we had heavy rains, and the government quietly opened the Hope Canal, and the water went into the Atlantic. The reason for the Hope Canal, first of all, a long-term solution, because weather patterns have changed significantly. And so you can have short periods of intense rainfall. You know, when you would get a monthly average could be in the, say, 50 years ago, 7 inches, you can get 7 inches of rainfall in a single night now. So we recognize that this is so. This storage capacity of the Conservancy was a problem. So every rainy season, when the Conservancy was high and it was overtopping, remember it's an earthen dam, you had to release the water into the Mahaika Creek. There was no alternative, because you blow water into the Demerara River and Mahaika Creek to save Georgetown, the East Coast, etc., and the Conservancy Dam breaking, because it would flood all these areas. But by releasing water into the Mahaika River, we compounded the problem with the high river, because water comes down from the backlands and swells the river. So the moment we release the water into the Mahaika River, you would see major flooding immediately in Mahaika. I went to number 10, I went to Bayabu. In Mahaika, they have no flooding. Or not no, but they have very little water. Normally the roads would be covered, etc. I drove all the way down to Bayabu. At the real back end, they do have some water in the fields. A man lost 105 acres there or something, but most of it is the Mahaika area has been relatively unscathed. But the water that you blow into Mahaika River doesn't stay there. It goes across the savannas into Maikoni and Abari. Had we blown water now into the Mahaika River, if we didn't have hope, Mahaika, Maikoni, Abari would have all been flooded. Much more. The problems would have been several times worse. I went there knee-deep, waist-deep in water in the past. It's not so now at this point in time. So that was the first big infrastructure. It cost us a lot of money. Cost us over $16 million US. We used Petro-Caribbean funds to finance that. That was one. Secondly, several canals were, secondly, when they had the major flood years ago, we built the embankment. We empolled on the Mahaika Creek. We sent in several machines and we started building the river wall. And we gave each family, this was about 12 years, 13 years back, each family the use of the machine for 2 days so that they could have impounded their land. That helped significantly. That's the second thing. Thirdly, the Mahaika-Maikoni Road, the branch roads. We built these branch roads. These were earthen dams going in. Now they're paved roads. You can drive into those areas. We did several canals out to the Atlantic and cleared every other thing. We put in pumps in the area, several pumps. So I'm really pleased with the efforts we made in these areas. Now we couldn't, with all of those efforts, we still couldn't stop flooding. That's why we never made any public claim that we stopped flooding in Guyana. And then when people encountered difficulties, we helped them. So when the rice farmers lost all their crops, what we did, we bought some seed paddy and gave them so they could go back. We got fertilizer and gave them that so they could go back. That sort of thing, assistance. So I'm very pleased that you asked me that question, so I get a chance to say what we did.
More questions?
Dr. Jagdeo, part of what Mr. Harmon said was that the two strategies that we left, the NDS and the PSIP programs, are not frameworks that the government can work with. Are not frameworks that the government can work with to develop its own economic policy. What's your position, given that the Private Sector Commission has said that the PSIP program is a good one?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, yes. I'm very confused. This government is so haphazard. For example, let me just digress. You know, they've been speaking about the missing $5 million from the sale of GT&T shares. And now, first we heard it's missing. Trotman came and made a big revelation that it's missing. Now we are hearing the people didn't pay and they're claiming that somebody waived it, etc. So this government is, I can't coherently or give a coherent explanation to nonsensical positions. That is my single thing. Can't give coherent explanation to nonsensical positions. Most of these are like that.
Ms. Jagdeo, you've clearly been very critical of the President's lack of action.
Yeah.
And you as a former President, what would your advice be to him to do? Some of these things he could do.
He just needs to call all of the people and say, it's my government. It's my reputation. I've been saying these things, and half of you are acting contrary to, if he's serious, acting contrary to what I've publicly promised. And so I want to see difference. I want to see you behave as though there will be real social cohesion, not be partisan in, they talk a lot about social cohesion too. I want you to get local democracy to actually function. I want to get an investigation, a report on all these matters that have been in the public domain, not only by us, but by the media and Transparency International, etc., that should come to my desk. He could do that tomorrow. And I notice, as I said before, that this government likes to take advice from foreigners. Yeah, you wanted to ask me something? Okay, go ahead.
Well, you would have mentioned the foreign diplomat telling the government what to do. And which foreign diplomat and was this about?
Yeah. There are lots of diplomats. It seems as though there are lots of people telling this government what to do. So we farm out our economic strategy somehow to the IMF and somebody else. We're quoting IMF figures to say there is no crisis in Guyana in the economy, when your entire private sector is telling you to the contrary. We're quoting international organizations who are not resident here. We don't have a program even with the IMF now. We only have an Article 4 consultation. We now, it pains me as a president and as a patriot, because I think we all love this country, to see the groveling of our government, you know, the sucking up to people who are junior people in the international community, junior people, hanging on to their every last word as though it's gospel, trying to shift policies to accommodate these people. And half of them don't have national interests at heart, our interests. It pains me because our forefathers, starting from slavery and all the way through, and even indigenous people, they fought against this sort of thing. They fought against this. When we fought for independence, we fought to change that reality. And we seem to like to suck up to these people. And half of what they say, pure nonsense. Pure nonsense. You know, just loud and pure nonsense. I don't have to call any name. I don't have to call any name. But I've seen people saying, you know, public officials should disclose their assets, etc., and not say a word that this government just rejected a motion for public disclosure of their assets. And that was tabled by the PPP, all assets for all MPs and former presidents. And they voted against a motion for public disclosure of tax records for former presidents and members of parliament. And they have consistently not complied with the laws surrounding declaration of income and assets. And then we hear this jaundiced position. So this is, I'm clear about it. I believe the international community is important. I believe as partners we should listen to them. Listen to advice. It must be done in-house in a manner that is decent, in good faith, but it can't be lectures. We can't put people, junior officers, up on a pedestal from the Foreign Service of any country and then sit like compliant people, all the ministers and stuff like that, sit like compliant students and get lectured about how we run our country or our future. When their countries are sometimes in more of a mess than ours.
Mr. Jagdeo, the operations of the People's Militia has come back into focus, given that the person wanted for the grenade attack on Petroleum was identified as a former member of the militia. What is your position on the non-disclosure, given that you're talking about transparency, about the operations of the People's Militia?
Let me say that any attack on press freedom is reprehensible, should be condemned, and the perpetrators brought to justice. Any attack on people's right of expression, people's ability to gather and to freely disseminate their ideas, any such attack should be condemned. And if that is what happened here, then I condemn it too. And we should all find the perpetrators. Now, having said that, I saw the first release from the government after the incident. And the government, rightly in the first paragraph, condemned the attack, and then 3/4 of the release sought to direct the police investigation to the PPP. They already knew, talking about, oh, it's the PPP that withdrew ads from the Kaichor News, and the PPP that did this. In the same press release condemning the act, about 5, they listed 5 things that the PPP did. Well, the grenade was never thrown at Glenn Lal in the PPP's period. That's one. Secondly, when he was scared, running scared in New York, hiding out, in the period when we had the politically inspired crime wave in the early 2000s, we actually gave him some of the people. He hired some bodyguards, and we allowed his bodyguards to, because he said he was threatened, to have a license for their weapons. So it wasn't that he came back to Ghana. He said he wasn't coming back because he was scared, and so we allowed that. But let's go through the facts of it. This had to be the work of someone in the government immediately directing attention to the PPP. And so let's go through all the possibilities, because the police have to keep an open mind on this matter. One, the first person who could have done it, as the government said, could be the PPP. Okay, so the police, I'm saying, the police have several options that they can consider. The first option is the PPP did it, and they should keep an open mind on it. I know we did not, but they should look into that too. And the reason I'm saying we did not is because our track record is there. For all the years we've been in office, you've never had that, even with the most hostile criticisms against us by Glenn Lal. When we were in office, when we had political power, we didn't use political power to suppress him. So that's one. Two, this could have been done by APNU. That's the second option, because recently he has been very critical of some members of APNU, some ministers, and they could have arranged it. The third option could be this was done by Glenn Lal working with Nagamutu and Ramjatan to cast suspicions on Harman, because they had a conspiracy to taint Harman's character, and Moses Nagamutu and the others were doing it because he felt slighted. Harman exercises more power in the office of the president. He sits in an office like a junior minister, although he enjoys the trappings of the prime minister's office, and Harman is in charge over there. So it could be part of this to throw suspicion onto Harman too. And conspiracy, the police have to keep all the options open, all possibilities. What's the fourth option? The fourth option is that the WikiLeaks describe Glenn Lal as having serious contacts with the criminal underworld. This is the US government. Could it be that some unpaid bill or something was the reason for this? Because we saw the attack in the past, on Kaichor News. Not because they were, let's not explore that too much, but somebody should. I don't want to do it on air, but somebody should explore the real reasons maybe behind the attack and the reprehensible, the sad killing of all of those pressmen. That's the fourth option. And then the fifth option could be Glenn Lal himself. To do this so that he gets attention. His paper has been doing a little badly, not being read so much now, the circulation fell. And so it boosts your circulation, you become the story. One. Two, he gets sympathy, so all the diplomats suddenly say, oh, press freedom. He becomes a hero, and he loves this. He has this hero complex, and so that could happen. And three, then he says, the PPP took away my gun licenses from my bodyguards. So it sets the stage for him to get back his gun licenses and bodyguards again. Could it be one of the five? I've given you 5 options. All I'm saying is the police must keep an open mind and do your work, go where the trail leads you. Not to be steered by a press release from Nagamoto's office, not in the direction of the PPP. There are several possibilities here, and the police must follow each to the end and then make the final conclusion. When they find the person, take action against them. But this is how we have to analyze these things, and I hope that the police will do the same. Because I have a deep problem with the people's militia and the transparency again. But I don't think that should be because these guys were maybe linked to the reserves. One would automatically, I would not want to automatically conclude, and the police should not, that it was the government that did this. They must not automatically draw that conclusion. And so that is what I'm saying. The police must examine it, all of these things.
Well, given your problem with the lack of transparency with the militia, what would you call for?
Yes, that Granger needs to talk a bit more about. He says, that's the way I do business, above board and transparently. I quoted him. Yeah. No problem, no problem.
About foreign intervention, and you cautioned the government not to suck up too much and so on. I wanted to ask you specifically about your thoughts on the sentiments expressed by the outgoing Deputy Chief of Mission, Brian Hunt. At the Sphere of Reception, where he called for end to the take of politics, constitutional reform, he said.
I would think that the ambassador, I have not heard his speech there, so I can't comment on his speech that I have not heard. And I'm not of the view that as politicians and as leaders in our country, that we have to, from government or opposition, comment on everything that any diplomat says, or take it as gospel too. If it's good for our country, we should welcome the advice and the help and assistance. But we must not feel obligated that anything they say to us that we have to pursue because we want to be in their good books. We have to determine our own foreign policy, what's good for Ghana. I saw some report I was told about that came out of some international organization that said we shouldn't expand our airport because we'll never be an international hub. You think I would have allowed some junior person from, say, a country in South America to come and write a report on Ghana, a person who never just may finish school, university, and just start working in an international organization, never run anything, never did anything, half of the time don't know anything about our country, and then write a report to deal with a project of that nature that is transformative, that can reduce freight, that can improve linkages or tourism, that can bring cheaper flights for our people, allow him to determine the fate of that project or the organization. We have to have the courage to say, the advice is good, but hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. We can think through these things ourselves in Guyana. And so a lot of the things that we are lectured about, I have a problem. I said this, let me tell you, I've spoken with President Clinton, I've spoken with President George Bush Jr., I've spoken with President Obama, Hillary Clinton, Kerry, several people at the senior levels in the US government. I've never seen this sort of arrogance and lecture from them that this, because, and these are the pinnacle of their career, that I've seen from some junior officials from these countries. Not this kind of arrogance. They never sought to tell us what to do. In fact, I said to President Obama, we don't need sometimes all the money. We just need reciprocity. Reciprocity. We don't need asymmetrical relations. We don't need lectures. Don't lecture us on how to fight drug dealers. Help us to secure our borders. Give us the satellite coverage so we can track planes and boats that breach our borders, and give us the intelligence and help us to get a means of fast boat or some way to go after them. No use you give general advice and say you must fight drug dealers. You have to give specific advice. And all of the leaders, that was the approach they had. Sometimes the leaders of these countries have a more enlightened approach than some of the officials that I see who come to lecture us here. It makes me a little ashamed being a former president when I see some of our people groveling up, sucking up to be invited to a reception or something of that sort, and to have, people give them a pat on their back of being, they're receiving approbation from someone from abroad. We should have more pride as Guyanese.
Yes.
Yeah.
Question concerning a report on this, so specifically the property holdings in. As to the reason why this would have split up proceeds from selling properties into different accounts.
Yeah. First of all, the person who did NISIL report is Gulsaran. You know my beef about Gulsaran. He has done shoddy work there at NISIL. He took the minutes of the old meetings and elevate what they discussed there into issues of corruption. So Winston Brassington gave a 200 pages response to an audit that is maybe 80-something pages. Have you seen Brassington's response? That is what I've been calling for consistently. How come the Ministry of Finance is putting up the audits themselves and not putting up the response that people gave? And then that would allow you to write a more balanced report. But if the media now carries only what they've been saying. Take, for example, I saw the new GMC. They said that they spent $500,000 to pay, and this is a corrupt act, to pay for the junior minister of agriculture to go to the Rupununi. Now, he wasn't going there on a campaign trail. He was going there because that sector, he was looking at issues relating to small business development and sourcing, etc. So that becomes corrupt now. And the government, this government spent over $30 million on travel for local government elections, and we don't hear a word about it. 30 million. Over 30 million. And so that was the Kaichor News civilizing the $500,000 as major corruption. And then you have a big boo-boo staring at you, you know, in your eyes, and then you're complaining about a little thing that someone else has on their nose. That is what I'm worried about. Please ask them to get a response. Ask Jordan, could I please get a response that the response that Brassington did to all of these matters? And then let's see if they will give. This is my public thing. I urge them to publish the audits. You recall, we are pushing them to publish the audits. But we are pushing them to publish the audits with the responses, not just the audit.
In relation to the MP Nigel Baranda, are you satisfied after your investigation that there are no lingering concerns over perhaps domestic or spousal abuse or wanton use of a weapon? From your investigation, are you satisfied that the action of the MP was not in any way?
Well, I spoke with both parties. I spoke with Dharamlal and I spoke with his wife or ex-wife, and so they both gave me a version of their version of the matter, and so I think having heard their version, the versions don't diverge totally, and so that's why we're at this stage. We're just moving on from the matter. I saw the DPP has not recommended any charges.
So the party and you are satisfied?
Now this is me, I'm telling you. I missed the meeting, the executive meeting. I wasn't there. So the Rohi will deal with that. But personally, I sought to get explanations.
And you're satisfied that there is no period?
Satisfaction is one word. I said, the versions don't diverge.
So are you convinced that there is nothing for concern?
There are always issues of concern in everything. You heard me express concerns about everything here this afternoon.
Any more questions? Thank you very much, members of the media. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Bye.